Right, okay. So what we thought would be fun to talk about is the original Game Boy and specifically movie licenses. Now, part of it is because I think for certainly you and I, Garron, that there was games we absolutely love on the original Game Boy, and we were trying to find a way of sort of bringing them all together, and it seemed a great idea to sort of tie it in with the movie licenses, because it just so happened some of the ones dearest to certainly my heart were all movie licenses on the Game Boy. And I think it'd be great for our listeners, because I suspect for quite a few, some of these will have passed people by. So, or they've been scared off because the film tie-ins on every other system were absolutely terrible. So they've assumed naturally that the Game Boy one must be terrible as well. And that's where I think this will be, a really sort of strong show. But before we go into our first game, what's your memories of the Game Boy itself?
I'm very fond. I had one, like many systems, on US release for American Airbase. So I had one very early on, so probably a couple of months after it came out in the US.
Yeah.
So probably autumn 89. Had a few games with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realised that a few of my friends liked it. So I bought a few more and made a bit of a profit. So that was always good. But I really liked the Game Boy. I had high anticipations from it from reading Ace magazine. So it was a console I was excited about before launch. Getting things from Japan then was kind of hit and miss for me. But I was really lucky to get one ahead of the UK launch. And yeah, played it absolutely loads. Had, like many of us, the magnifying screen with a light on, which made it even heavier, would tilt it. And I did go through a phase of kind of taking it with me everywhere, playing it at lunch break at work. Yeah, absolutely loved it. And I've still got my original one upstairs.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? I've still got my original one, and I've got that still sort of like your eyes bleed, very, very early 90s. The like fluorescent yellow sort of like bum bag with like little shapes, very, very typical of the 90s, where I would chuck the Game Boy and all the original game carts in. Unfortunately, I suppose as a kid, I lost the boxes over time, because you just take the game carts with you everywhere. But yeah, I mean, I've still got a lot of the games we're going to cover were games that I owned back in the day and still own to this day, because I never got rid of them. Because you're right, it was just such a revelation with the system, wasn't it? Because up until the Game Boy came out, you had your tabletops, you had the old Game & Watches, didn't you, and devices like that. But there was nothing that hit the mainstream. I know there were things like the Microvision and stuff, which allowed you to change cartridges, but there was nothing that truly was what you could class as portable that had a good battery life and such a great library of games. It really took it to the next level.
And as we look back on it now, we look at it and you go against the Game Boy Advance and its iterations and you think it's quite chunky, but at the time this was portable.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing going back to it today, because I did try to play on my original Game Boy when I first was sort of playing through some of these games, and I forgot how dark that screen is on the original Game Boy. So you get so spoiled. So I quite quickly moved on to play it through the Game Boy SP Advance, because you get the backlit. So one of the things I've always wanted to sort out, and I will do it at some point, is buy one of those modded original Game Boys with the backlit put in.
So even I could mod my Game Boy, so you can as well. If not, we know that Kingy's had a night off. We will send it up to Kingy. But I got a kit from one of the shows, and there's a company called Deadpan Robot who've got every sort of single component that you could want for any of the Game Boys, from the screens, the buttons, the backlight kits. So I did mine, and it's made it really, really nice. It's a really crisp screen. You get different colour screens. But yeah, just so it doesn't sound like an advert for Deadpan Robot.
Why not? If they do good stuff. Why not?
Absolutely. Yeah. The service was great, and they've got instructions. So it took me, the first one I did, it probably took about 90 minutes, if I'm honest. A little bit of soldering involved, but boy, is it worth it to get that screen in there.
Oh, crumbs. Yeah, no. One day I will. You see, you said soldering. I mean, you're talking about a guy that it took me half an hour to find my screwdriver, let alone.
Yeah.
I, don't, I certainly don't own anything like a soldering iron. So I don't know. One day, I always look at my local retro gaming shop, and every now and again there's like a modded thing in there, and I tend to pick them up. Yes, I will do it. But I mean, for now, the Game Boy Advance really is a good way of playing it. And interestingly, actually, and I didn't appreciate this, but obviously you can play the Game Boy through the Super Game Boy, which was the device that you plugged in to the SNES, wasn't it?
Yep,
That's a great way of
it was.
playing it. But also, I didn't appreciate this until my friend Charlie, hello Charlie, he asked to borrow my EverDrive for the Game Boy because, as I say, certainly for this show, I had all the original games anyway, and he wanted to sort of play some of them himself. And I didn't appreciate that you can actually plug in the original, well, certainly with the Game Boy Color, because the EverDrive is a Game Boy Color that does original Game Boy as well, into the Game Boy player on the GameCube add-on.
I never realised you could do that.
Yeah, so I mean that's great, isn't it? Because I mean, obviously with that you can sort of play on the big screen. So I was getting quite envious because he was like showing me, he was showing playing all of these games. The one thing I would say to, I'm just going to look it up what it's called. But when I was sort of playing through a lot of these games, I stumbled across the BGB emulator. I'll put it in the show notes. But I was really impressed with that emulator because it really looks like they've got the right color palette. There's even when you play it on the Super Game Boy or you play it on the Game Boy player that's into the GameCube, the colors are obviously sort of changed, and it's got to be that sort of green hue, or it just doesn't feel like it was when you used to play it back in the day. For me, at least. And this emulator does do that. You can actually even choose: do you want it to look like it was on the Super Game Boy, or do you want it to look like it was on the Game Boy player? And it seemed to emulate everything absolutely perfect. The music was great, and of course, you get those lovely save states, which are always wonderful with emulators, particularly with some of these games because they are like incredibly tough. But I try to not use them wherever possible.
That's good. Does it make you tilt the screen and adjust the contrast so you can see it in the right light as well?
Yeah.
Is it a true emulator?
Yeah. You have to hold it under the direct light, just to catch it just right. Do you remember that on the Game Boy? You used to have to you have big like spot lamps on, didn't you, on it?
Oh, absolutely.
Just try to catch it. Yeah.
Had the angle pose lamps on your desk trying to playing it, so it was great, but it did have some limitations.
Yeah, no, tell me about it. Mostly the biggest limitation was my mum was addicted to Tetris, so I had to fight for this until she got a Game Boy herself. I had to fight to get the Game Boy off her often.
I don't think she was alone in that. I think there's a lot of us up and down the country had to fight to get Tetris out of parents' hands.
Well, I was certainly addicted to Tetris as well. Happy days.
The real story, the love story, a woman in danger, a hero in black, the adventure you've been waiting for. Where does he get those wonderful toys? What are you? I'm Batman. Rated PG-13, now playing at a theater near you.
But we're going to go on to our first game, which is Batman. So this is, of course, was released in June 1990 by Sun Corporation of America, Sun Electronics Corp, developed by. It's a brilliant side-scrolling sort of platform shooter, very different from the other ports. I mean, they sort of simplified things down a bit, isn't it, to its core essence? But it's a really sort of solid side-scroller, isn't it, really?
It is. I'll have to go in straight off the bat and say this is not only one of my favourite Game Boy games, but one of my favourite games I've got, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
I love this game. It's brilliant. I like the art, so I know in later Batman games the graphics and the sprites changed. For me, when you look back at it now, the main sprite looks more like Del Boy's version of Batman as opposed to True Superhero. But what a game, as you say, Paul, what a game this is.
Yeah, I mean, so to our listeners, if you've never played the Game Boy version, really is a true classic. As I say, he's a little bit squat and fat in how he looks, particularly if you stretch the screen. But even in the natural resolution, he still looks a little bit sort of squat and fat. And you go through the levels. You can jump pretty high, shoot blocks to release special powers. There's different weapons, so you get things like sort of like long range shooting where it goes a lot further, the bullet's a lot more powerful. You get wavery ones, you get the batarang that goes forward and back, you get the dreaded shotgun which you've got to avoid at all costs because it's rubbish. And it's just great, isn't it? As you sort of make your way through the levels, it's very much everything's always follows the same pattern, so you always get to learn the patterns, which is wonderful. And you just sort of make your way through the music. I mean, let's talk about the music for a second. I mean, it's one of my favourite tunes. I mean, it's just, when I was playing this, it was just I'd forgotten because it's been a few years since I played Batman, and I just forgot how phenomenal this music is, isn't it, G?
It is. It is absolutely brilliant. I think as you go through from the start screen to the levels, it is very immersive. It doesn't grate on you at all for the replay. It is very atmospheric and it sets the scene for the game. There is a hidden sound test for this. So if you want to listen to the music, if you press up and right and the start button and like the splash screen, you'll get a menu so you can just go through and listen to the music for the game, which I recommend if you haven't played it, some of the listeners to at least do that so they can understand how good the music is.
Well, we'll certainly have it running in the background with this, so our listeners will be hearing the wonderful music. But as you say, it's one of the best sort of soundtracks. Of course, a lot of people were involved with this in the sound stakes, also did the equally brilliant music on the NES for Batman. It's just a talented sort of people.
It was Sunsoft, and this is kind of the peak of Sunsoft coming from the NES era, coming into the Game Boy, and this type of veer from them. They made some absolutely top-notch games.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, a lot of the people that worked on this, like Akira Asada, I mean, he tended to do quite obscure things like Platoon on the NES and Afterburner on the NES. Quite a few of the programmers also worked on another game we will cover later. And I say that for the music, a lot of the musicians worked on again Batman on the NES and Gremlins, and also a game called Pieces. Do you remember that on the SNES?
Yeah.
Really, really good. If people have never heard of Pieces, it's a great jigsaw puzzle game, which probably isn't selling it very well, but it's really, really addictive. I'm surprised it's never actually hit the mobile market, if I'm honest, because it'd be perfect for it. But I mean, a lot of the people involved, that's what they tended. They clearly did the lesser known stuff at Sunsoft, but they really sort of showed their way with doing this game and showed their clear skill at producing such a game as this, because it really is, for me, this is probably the best. I'd probably say it's one of the best Batman adaptations. I actually prefer this to even the Amiga Batman the movie or even the NES version. I just find this is a lot more honed to perfection. It's a real challenging game as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. I think because of the size of the sprites, it gives you a larger play area. So whatever stage you're in, you're seeing a lot more play area, when I think in the other conversions the main sprite was a lot larger. So you had a smaller play area. Here you can see quite a long way in front of you. You can kind of map your course out. You can see the darker blocks are the blocks that have got the hidden items in. And you can see that as you go left, you can't really scroll backwards on this game. So if you miss a power up or a block, that's gone from you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then of course in later levels they start mixing it up. So it starts off like the sort of Gotham, and then it goes to like the chemical plant, and then you get a couple of Batwing levels where it turns into a side-scrolling shoot 'em up, which is for me, that was a bit I really, really struggled with. And I realised as a kid, even though I owned this game, I'd never got past the second Batwing level.
Oh, the one with the large helicopter as the boss.
Yes, yeah, just because it goes on that boss forever and ever, doesn't it? It's really difficult, and of course it restarts right the way back at the beginning of the level when you die, which is a bit frustrating. So although it's quite liberal with the lives, it's quite easy to burn those lives away, particularly as you have to start right at the beginning in most cases. Yeah, but I mean, this time I was really chuffed. I managed to beat it for the first time.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
So I'm really pleased. I know you're really pleased when you like.
Oh, I was. Yeah. Yeah, because you get to just before the Batwing level, you get to fight Jack, who of course becomes like the Joker, and he's quite a tough boss. But very much you learn the pattern, you can sort of like move on. But yeah, as I say, the Batwing levels always used to stump me. Got through it, and then of course you're on cathedral levels, which tough to a point. But the worst one is one where it's like force scrolling. There's a level like that, and that's a real nightmare. That had me stumped for a while. But it was nice to finally complete this game for the podcast and finally put to bed like one of the games that I've never been able to do before.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
I highly recommend this game for people to check it out. Don't be put off by the small size of the sprites. The playability is brilliant. It's in line with the first Mario game on the Game Boy. It's that kind of size of sprite, isn't it? The background is very good, and it's reminiscent, so you know that if it's like the museum level or cathedral level or the chemical factory, it does tie it in. Yeah,
it ties in as much as you want with the film. Yeah, as I say, I mean this is why I owned it back in the day, because of course Batman when its release was just so popular, wasn't it? Everybody just went bat crazy, didn't they, around this time? Because it came the year before, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah, so I mean, I was like lapping up anything that was Batman. You know, loved Batman on the Amiga and stuff like that. But yeah, this in many ways I think plays a lot better. I'd also recommend that the ones on the NES are very, very good as well. They're just, I suppose it's the nostalgia feels with it all. Is there any more you want to sort of say about this particular game? Or any thoughts maybe about the movie itself?
No, the movie was good. I think I like the cutscenes in this game, give you a bit more info on where it goes, and Batman does it more like Batman.
Yeah, the investigations and stuff.
Yeah, it is a really good game.
Yeah, the cutscenes are pretty good, aren't they? There's one thing the Game Boy could do, very detailed graphics. It had quite a high res screen, really. With the shades as well, it could produce some quite detailed pictures, really, considering the screen.
And I say the level design is very good. Just to go back, I say the level design is good. I think it is quite a fair game. And like I say though, on the cathedral levels, I think there's two of them. The second one is quite difficult.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's the one with the force scrolling. Just that had me stumped for ages. It was just so difficult to make your way through. And then of course you get like the final. Well, it's no spoiler really because everyone knows the film. But of course you finally pit yourself against the Joker himself, and that is a super tough boss. They're really throwing everything at you. He's got like a massive gun and trying to beat him. Yeah, I can't recommend this game enough, and particularly look at the show notes. You know, if you can try it through the emulator and just experience this game. All of these games we're going to talk about, because I guarantee, not as Garron alluded to, these are some of our favourite games, not just on the Game Boy, but on the whole system. And there's quite a few people I've come across, perhaps a little bit younger than us, that they sort of naysay the whole Game Boy because they just see the graphics and assume it's like massively inferior. And in fact, you know, look past the graphics and you'll find a real love for some of these games.
Tired of school?
Who was Joan of Arc?
Noah's wife?
Like to travel?
Can we go anywhere we want at any time?
You can do anything you want.
Let's reach out and touch someone.
Meet interesting people.
How's it going, Royal Ugly Dudes? Put them in the Iron Maiden. Excellent! Execute them, bogus.
Then hitch a ride with Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Dude.
Rated PG. Starts Friday, February 17th at a theater near you.
Right, so shall we go on to our next game?
Let's.
Now this one's a real favourite of mine. We're going through sort of like, you know, alphabetical through this. This one is Bill and Ted's Excellent Game Boy Adventure. Released by LJN, developed by a development house that I particularly love, which is Beam Software, and they released this in 1991. And it's sort of based on, well, very, very loosely based on Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, of course released in 1989 with Keanu Reeves, and I forgot his other, Alex Winter, isn't it, is the other guy. And also the sequel, which is Bill and Ted's Bogus Adventure. And for those who don't know, with the film, absolute classic, and of course there's a new third film coming along that they're going to released next year. But it's basically two sort of like high school dropouts, bit of a losers, play in a band, and they're about to drop out of school, and a guy from the future, because they're apparently really big rock stars, basically gives them a time machine and says, go to different time periods and you'll be able to, in the Battle of the Bands, do this big display and pass history, and therefore you won't flunk school. It's a totally ridiculous storyline, but it's just so much fun. There's these like two dudes from California go around collecting people like Napoleon and Socrates from history, isn't it? And lots of quotable lines. So that's the film. I mean, what's your memories of the film before we go into the game itself?
Yeah, very good. Bit abstract. It was very fun how they got all of the people together. It had some quite good special effects for the time as well, if I remember.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it was one of those films with people of some up-and-coming stars, and like the Wild Stallions, the Air Guitar, No Way, Yes Way, all that. Yeah,
it's got some lovely quotable lines, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a great fun film.
Yeah, but obviously, game-wise, a lot of the games that came out on most of the systems were absolutely terrible. There was quite a few, like on the Amiga and the Atari Lynx and that, which was this sort of weird adventure game that was a bit average, a bit meh. And that was it in terms of the other platforms. But on the Game Boy, it got a completely different game. And I think it passed a lot of people by because they played Bill and Ted on the other platforms, thought, meh, not very good game, and then just understandably ignored the rest. Whether this game on the Game Boy is a really good single-screen platformer, very much like Chucky Egg, but taking it forward in terms of ideas. So like Chucky Egg, the idea is just to go and collect objects. They're not eggs this time, but it's on the first world it's orbs, and it tends to be themed depending on which time zone you're in, so it'd be like stars or whatever for the Wild West. And the idea is you just have to go and collect everything. The time machine will pop up and then you hop in the time machine. But what's so great about the game, and this is why it's genuinely one of my favourite games, just so many fond memories, is every level was always introducing something new. So not only whether it's just like a new enemy that's perhaps like Napoleon who throws his hat and sort of like a boomerang, or it gets quite puzzly where there's sort of like crumbling platforms and there's only one way to negotiate the level, or as you collect an item a wall will disappear and that will help you decide the best way to go through. And that's what I love about it, is every single level you're always feeling that something new. There's always something new to find and explore, which is with a lot of games when you play it, you think after the first world, oh well, I've seen everything there is to see, there's nothing new or surprising. This isn't the case with this game. I mean, what's your take on this game?
Yeah, I think like all good games or all movie license games, if you strip the license away, is there still a really good game underneath?
Yes.
And that absolutely is with this game. Like you've said, Paul, single screen puzzler, it starts you off nice and easily. It introduces you to the mechanics, so you get a little bit of a short conveyor belt. You will find the time machine that would come and get you in a logical place. When you first play the game, you think, oh, get sort of, is it 8 or 9 lives? You think, got a lot of lives.
Yeah.
But you will need them, because as you go on in the game and progress, there are sometimes you'll clear all of the, like I say, the shields or the bones or whatever you've got to collect, and realise you actually can't get back to where the time machine has appeared, because that won't appear until you've collected the last item that you need to collect for that level. And as you say, it's brilliant, very fiendish. So on some of the levels, if you jump the wrong way off a platform, I think in England get the shields, the bottom platform comes and you can't finish a level, so you have to die and jump right off a platform, and then you have to go round a different way. So some levels you can do more than one way. Some levels there is only one way to do it, and you do collect extra lives as you go. There's mystery boxes that can have like a 1-up in them, or a balloon, which is quite good, so you can float up to different parts of the level. And I just think that it does get quite difficult, but it's very rewarding, and it has got a password system. So once you've moved on through the different eras, because I think there's 10 sets of levels, I think are they adventures and quests, aren't they? They're broken down.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and in as you say, you go through, and each one is distinctly different with all the enemies and etc. Isn't it? You get with the zap stick, or like Socrates in like the Greek levels, a big sort of like well, I think I don't know if it's Socrates or whether it's Plato, because he's a bit of a bruiser, a bit of a which you can sort of they sort of push you off the platform. So there's just so much charm to it, and it's exactly for in one of the previous shows we talked about sort of Chucky Egg, and for me this really is like the spiritual successor. It's where I would want Chucky Egg to take me to, where it's all these different cool mechanics, but still that core basic gameplay of Chucky Egg, of basically single screen collect all the items. Yeah, really, really good. Great music again. Very difficult to find out much about this game, and I think it's because it passed a lot of people by. It was really difficult to sort of find even who's worked on this game and things over the years, which is a shame. I even sort of tried to complete it to see if it told you, who'd completed it. Unfortunately, my younger self was a bit of an idiot when it came to Game Boy. So although I own this game, I only kept the cart for whatever reason. I think my lack of space over the years as a kid, and must have unfortunately got rid of the boxes for my shame. It's weird. I never did it with any other platform. Just Game Boy. It seems to have done it for.
I think it's because it had such a sturdy case for the
Yeah.
cartridge. I think that, like you say, there's a lot of cases and carry bags and bum bags for the Game Boy, so I think we just got used to taking the Game Boy and the carts with us as opposed to the boxes. We didn't have game shelves back then, did we?
Well, that's it, and particularly with the Game Boy, the last thing you wanted to do was lug boxes with you, so you just, as you say, you just chucked all the games. They were in their nice little individual cases, wasn't it? Little plastic cases to keep them safe. Or certainly, I must have bought them. I can't remember. Certainly, all my games have got little like plastic protective cases for them, and yeah. So you're probably right, that's exactly what I did. It's just such a shame nowadays as an adult, because a lot of these games are really difficult to find complete in the box with instructions, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think I said, so a lot of the games we've gone through, a couple of the later games are sort of about £10 for the cart, but some of these games are around £5 you can put up cart only. But just going back to Bill and Ted's, I think it's extremely satisfying when you worked out the puzzle and progressed. And it's an excellent style of game for the platform, because you've got the password, so you can actually kind of do like each set of 5 levels, get your password, and then come back to it.
Yeah, no, I was exactly the same way. As a kid, I just used to adore this one, because you're right, it's very much pick up and play. You can always start off from where you left. The levels are always short, so you can always beat a world relatively quickly. In a car journey or whatever, you could usually sort of feel you progressing with a lot of these games. And part of the problem with Batman and things, by the time you got to like the Batwing level, the batteries would die on you. There was no like password, so you just like, oh god, better get the next recharged batteries, because although it was pretty good battery life on the Game Boy, it was still ate through its batteries, really. Certainly on the batteries back in the day. I think the batteries have got a little bit better these days.
They have. One sad thing about the game, it just ends. You get within the cutscene, there's not a boss after the 10th level. It just says you've kind of succeeded.
Yeah, be excellent to one another, and then back that's it, gone. Which I suppose again is very reminiscent of the old sort of like Spectrum and 8-bit classics, where they never really bothered on sort of taking up space on saying such things as like having a final cutscene. But you're right, it's a real shame, and one of the reasons I thought it was a real shame is that I was really hoping to see a credit roll. I always love that personally in a game, because you get to see who actually worked on the game. But yeah, I'd certainly, to all our listeners, if you've never played it, give this game a go. Honestly, it's a real, in my mind, a real hidden gem on the platform, because it doesn't really get talked that much about this one, does it really?
No, I would absolutely suggest people just try it. It's a great game.
Had you played it before this podcast, G, or was it one new to you or one you knew about?
I knew of it,
yeah,
and I'd played it back in the day, but only of playing it when someone else had the cart of probably doing a couple of the earlier levels.
Yeah,
so I hadn't got into the intricacies of it and the challenge of it.
Yes, yeah, no, it's one, yeah, well worth sort of putting the time with it.
We told you the rules.
Remember the first one? You can't get them wet.
Don't let them eat after midnight.
What if they're eating in an airplane and they cross the time zone? I mean, it's always midnight somewhere.
You didn't listen.
Now, was that civilized?
No, clearly not. Gremlins 2, the new batch.
rocking your way this summer. Rated PG-13. Starts Friday, May 18th at a theater near you.
Okay, so let's go on to the next game, which is another real favourite of mine. It is Gremlins 2, The New Batch. Of course, this is based on the sequel that was released in 1990 for the film, and it was a bit of a weird film, wasn't it, really? This time it's sort of in the Clamp complex. It's all sort of like a futuristic television studio network building, the sort of modern way, isn't it? And of course, Gizmo gets himself into trouble again at the sort of like testing centre. All these weird gremlin creations, isn't it? And because they're working with genetics, these sort of like testers, there's horrible different types of gremlins that are created in this, such as like spider gremlin and bat gremlin, isn't it? And gremlin that grows fruit. There's lots of weird sort of things in the film, and it had quite a strange tone, really, wasn't it, with Gremlins 2, whereas the first one was very, very dark in terms of tonally. Gremlins 2 was very much, one minute it was like really quite dark and quite gross, and the next minute quite funny. It was even more so in not sure where it was going to sit. Probably more on the comedy side, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right there.
Yeah, and but I remember still loving Gremlins 2, the film, very much. Again, though, gameplay-wise, there really wasn't much good games that were Gremlin related. I mean, there was a Gremlins text adventure on the Spectrum, which I was a big fan of. That was of the first film. But for me, Gremlins 2 games on other platforms weren't that good. Now, I know there's a lot of love for Gremlins 2 on the NES, which is sort of like more of an overhead affair. But I actually far prefer this one. I think it's much better and a more solid game. So this again is another Sun Corporation. Had a lot of people that worked on Batman also worked on this. Released in January 1991, and this is very much an out-and-out platformer, side-scrolling platformer. You play Gizmo, beautiful music, some of my favourite music on the Game Boy, and you just sort of make your way through the levels, dodge, hit the gremlins with your pencil if you pick up the power-up, and just make your way to the end of the level where you will come against an end-of-level boss, which will be one of the ones that featured in the game. So, you know, the first one, for example, is like the one that sort of has fruit and veg growing out of its face, so he's sort of throwing tomatoes at you. So what was your memories of this one, G?
I hadn't played it until the show. So one of the first thoughts was, bloody hell, it's hard.
Yes, it's a tough one.
So took me getting used to. I like when we talk about the music, like I said, I like the title screen, I like the in-game music, which you need to because you spend a bit of time, I think, to do this. You'll be playing it for a while. Overall, it's not probably too long a game when you get the hang of it. Really good graphics, and again, I know that's something we've said from all of the games. Again, the main sprites here are larger than the two previous games, and it sets the scene. Again, the backgrounds relate to the different rooms within the Clamp organisation. I liked the weapons, so I like the toolbox the best because you kind of go in a toolbox and you become invincible.
Yes, that's right. And it plays different music, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah, brilliant
So
music.
you jump on the stereo and there's a music note that will kind of go on your head, and then you fire it off and it will kind of bounce towards an enemy. But so your default weapon is the pencil, and that does make some of the end of level bosses extremely hard.
Yes, because it is, I mean, that's one of the reasons it's so tough, is because, as G alluded to, is that your actual standard is you have no weapon at all. You can do is jump, and that's really tough as it is. But if you pick up the pencil, at least you can hit the enemy. But because it's quite a small attacking arc, more often than not you will lose some energy if like a bat attacks you or something like that. More often than not you'll still lose energy even though you're frantically hitting them with the pencil, because you're quite frankly so close to the creature, and that's one of the things. And as G sort of alluded to, it's a mega tough game. However, I suppose maybe it's because I played it so much as a kid that it's very much you can learn the patterns. But you know, I mean, I can get quite far in this game. Back in the day, I got like I think certainly beyond the electric gremlin, so very very far on. And actually, for the podcast, admittedly, I put my hands up. I used the occasional save state on the emulator, but I did manage to complete it finally, which was another huge win. And I think I only used about 3 save states, so it wasn't too bad. It just takes away that sort of like pain, particularly with end level bosses having to go right the way back to the beginning once you lose all your lives and the credits. I mean, of course, you get lots of attempts with the credits and things, so it's not a problem from that point of view, but there's still an awful lot of the level you have to replay, because as G alluded to, the end level bosses, they are so tough. I mean, how far did you get through? Did you do the first boss, or did you get to the second boss, G?
I put a lot of time into this one.
Yeah.
I'd like to say, got a bit addicted to. Well, yeah, got a bit addicted to it. I think it just past the lightning boss.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
It splits up from like humanoid form into lightning bolts. You then have to avoid those. You go back, hit the energy when it's together, and then move away. But I think there's some pixel perfect jumping in here. You have to be quite close to the edge of the ledges. But likewise with the bosses, you need to learn the patterns of them, don't you?
Oh, very much. But even with knowing the pattern, the one that I struggled with the most was the second boss, where you're against the bat.
Gremlin.
The background, and I found that so difficult because basically the pattern's such where he will flap around, and then he will drop 3 smaller bats, and it'd be like a random pattern. You have to sort of time the jump over the bottom ones and dodge the sort of top bat, but they will follow you as you move, so you've really got to sort of time, and sometimes it's blind luck, sometimes you just can't avoid them. Thankfully those smaller bats only take like half a health off your meter, but at the same time the main sort of bat gremlin will then dive bomb you from overhead, at which point you haven't got a lot of time to get out of the way and then hit him with the pencil, and because like we alluded to, because the pencil's attack arc is so close, usually you get hit by him, and then he takes so many hits to kill, and if he hits you once you lose like about 1 whole health.
Yeah, because your health system is 4 hearts, isn't it? And
Yes, yeah.
Around the levels there's small hearts and there's large hearts, which will give you more energy back. But with that bat boss, I found it sort of standing underneath him, and as he came down, going left or right, then hitting him. But the problem is he's got the larger wings, so you have to hit him and then kind of run away. So it is controlling those 3 smaller bats.
Yeah.
That you say that would take a bit of health off. It is a bit of a war of attrition. The bosses are all very difficult, and you could see it being a roadblock to some people.
Yeah, certainly back in the day. I mean, I know for a fact when I was a kid, I only got to the electric boss, and I just couldn't get through. The other thing that we didn't mention, which is I think is quite cute, is there's a little bonus game that appears where you basically have to tap the buttons really fast to punch this punch bag, and if you
get to 100,
you get to 100, and then you get an extra life. But it's just very cute seeing Gizmo sort of like, you know, punch this punch bag as you're tapping away at the buttons to get through. Just a nice way of breaking up the action and giving something new. And that's what I love with this game. And it's a as G had alluded to, you know, if you took the license away from this, it still would be a really solid platformer. But of course, having it, you know, gremlin base, and being able to play Gizmo, and being a side scroller, so you sort of like see him in the cutest way, it's just lovely. And if that wasn't enough, it's just a really solid, you know, even though it's tough, solid. It's a really solid, well put together platform game, isn't it, G?
it is. I think it could have been more of a success if it was slightly easier, play tested a little bit more. I think it might have had a bit more critical success, but a standalone game, a movie type license, it is up there. Really good.
Really good. I think we're just getting soft in our old age. That's what I think too.
No, I don't know. I think this is just hard.
It's very much, I mean, certainly the first few levels I can sort of breeze through because I know all the ways you can sort of like how to tackle each bit. It's one of those games because I've played it so much. All the patterns are just like ingrained in my head, so I can sort of like, even as we're talking now, I'm sort of like running through in my mind all the levels. So, and the different paths which will allow you to get the big hearts and ways of tackling things. So it is tough, but it's definitely one that you can learn and quickly sort of progress with. I certainly adore it, and yeah, again, another one I would strongly urge our listeners to give it a try.
And if you do try, there is like a small jump and a large jump. I think that's quite important to getting through, isn't it? Because you do need to have like small jump sometimes when the spiders are coming down at you. A large jump when you just get hit by the spiders.
Yes.
There's 2 levels, but it is a very good game.
Yeah, no, very good, and it is good all the way through. This is another one that I managed to play all the way through, and it's, I suppose end to end it would be hard. When you see people do speed runs of it, they sort of do it in half an hour. It's not a particularly long game, I guess, by modern terms. But for mere mortals such as G and me, it'll take you a lot longer if you're like us. You'll certainly get your money's worth. And there's another one. I don't think it's that expensive, is it? Really, this one?
No, it's another good value one.
Yeah, exactly.
Leap into the new year with a Bond.
James Bond.
GoldenEye. Rated PG-13. Now playing.
Right, okay. Should we go on to our next game?
Indeed.
Yep, so our next game, I sort of threw this in because I think it's quite a unique one, really, and it's James Bond 007. Now, it's a really late release on the Game Boy, released in December the 15th, 1998 by Sapphire Incorporated, so pretty unknown sort of. I can't think of anything that Sapphire particularly. Oh, they did some of the. They did a lot of the movie licenses, didn't they? So they did, on the Game Boy, they did like Van Helsing and The Hobbit and the Game Boy Advance stuff. Lots of sort of like obscure stuff. But basically, very very late in the Game Boy life, they decided to do a James Bond license. And what's interesting about this one is, unlike doing, side scroller, which pretty much a lot of the James Bond, certainly in the 60mm era licenses tended to be, or going down the path of a first-person shooter like GoldenEye and things like that, they decided to do a Zelda-like overhead adventure game where you play James Bond, but you're essentially doing like Zelda, going into little huts, talking to the locals. You pick up certain weapons and special gadgets as you progress, and that helps you through the level. So what's your take of this one, G?
It's very involving. I'd never played this before the show. I think that the music is brilliant, great theme tune.
Yeah.
There's great music when you're in the casinos in the game, but you've got to get there first. It has a save game feature, which does really help. I say, as you said, it's late in the life cycle of the game. It's got a good interface, so as you play the game, you know what is equipped for button A and button B. And it had lots more depth than I thought it was going to have on each of the levels. I think that it could have done with a map on some of the later levels, because there is quite a lot of, as with any RPG, going to find a key, then having to go back to Itbell to get a key and go back and forward. I liked some of the humour in the game, in the speech, and I liked how you went through different parts of the world. You've got Q&M there. So as a movie tie-in to a Bond movie, I think it's got some scale in it for such a small game, really.
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing that I've always sort of loved with it, is because it takes you different places around the world, and as you say, all the characters are sort of there. You mentioned M and Q, and there's a lot of, it's quite a nice charm to the writing. It is very much a cookie cutter sort of Legend of Zelda. It is like anybody attempting to do a Zelda-like game that isn't Nintendo themselves. I suppose if you were to compare directly, it's a little lackluster. It's not got the same level of classic imagination as those sort of games, but nevertheless, it's a fun take on that James Bond. You know, it's good, clever use of a James Bond license, and nice to see somebody try and do something a bit different from just doing a sort of like cookie cut platformer. And that's why I just wanted to include it, because this came out so late in the Game Boy, original Game Boy's life. Most people, it passed them by. It certainly passed me by back in the day with this one. It's one that I've sort of discovered over the years because I'm such a James Bond fan. A good few years ago I went through a phase of playing every James Bond game, because that's kind of crazy things that I do. You know, I latch on and buy up all the James Bond games, and this was one that I sort of stumbled across through that, and thought, yeah, quite fun and interesting, really. And there's lots of locations you go to as well, isn't it, Gene?
Yeah, Marrakesh. I think you start in China.
Yeah.
Go to Sahara, there's Tibet. So it sends you all over the world. Kurdistan, you go back to London back to base, speak to QNM, and then you go out and you have to solve different problems in each of these locations.
Yes. And it's sort of basic puzzles, isn't it? I mean, a very early one, you know, without getting into sort of spoiler territory. So I'll give you the first puzzle. Bridge is broken. Guy says he can fix it, but he needs a hammer. Says my wife will probably have it. Find his house, find the wife, get the hammer, isn't it? You know, there's a really basic one, and to be honest, on the face of it, it doesn't get that much more complex than the puzzles, really. But what it does do is, as you get more and more gadgets, it becomes more involving, where you're switching between which gadget am I going to assign to button A, which am I going to assign to button B. You know, at the beginning you've got like punching, but you know, by the end of it, you've got a whole range of different skill sets and things you can do. Yeah, so and that's kind of why I wanted to include this in what we were talking about, because I think it's certainly for uniqueness, and for fans of James Bond, it's well worth tracking this down.
Yeah, I'm going to continue playing this, I think, to a finish. I'm not sure how far I've got to it, but I like the fact that there's different, like I said before, there's casinos. You've got sort of 3 little sub-games, like Baccarat and Blackjack as well. So that's quite a nice little diversion in the game.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
He died a hero.
Target?
And was reborn as RoboCop. A one-man police force with the strength of an army, the speed of a laser, the brain of a computer, and a body made of steel. Looking for me? RoboCop. Rated R.
Starts Friday, July 17th at a theater near you.
Right, okay, so we go on to our final game before we talk about honourable mentions and what have you.
Yeah, I know you like this one.
Yeah, now I'm a huge fan of this. So it is, of course, RoboCop, released in 1990. Well, this came out on multiple systems, but the Game Boy version is a really solid version of this, because it was done very much by the same team who did the Spectrum version of RoboCop, which I think is probably one of the best home ports for such a solid version. So you basically had the very, very talented Michael Lamb, who, what ones did he do? Target Renegades is a classic one. He did that on the Spectrum. He did Arkanoid, Revenge of Doe. He did Batman on the Spectrum. Real sort of top tier Ocean, and of course alongside him doing the graphics you had Dawn Drake, the very talented Dawn Drake, who very well known. She also did Target Renegade, she did like graphics for Batman and Jurassic Park, whole host of things that she did graphics for. And then of course the brilliant music by Jonathan Dunn, who, what hasn't he done? I mean, he's done that. If it was an Ocean game, chances are he probably did some of the music. It certainly did things like Ports, or things like New Zealand Story music, and Target Renegade again, and Platoon. Very, very talented individual that worked on a whole host of tunes for such games. But what is the game itself? Well, if you've ever played the arcade game, you probably know the story with this. Ocean got the license for Robocop, they came up with a very clever idea of getting Data East to do the arcade version. So they sort of re-licensed it out, and then on the back of that, they then could do the home ports. So Data East basically did the game, and they did all the home ports of it. And like with a lot of the home ports, they added things to the arcade game. So whereas the arcade version of Robocop is very much Robocop walking left to right and getting a gun out and doing shooting, and then end level bosses interspersed. In the home ports, they also added in extra bonus levels where there was sort of like face matching, identikit type puzzles, and there was also like shooting gallery sections where you have to shoot, somebody who's got holding somebody hostage in front of him, and just trying to time your shooting to kill the person, not the hostage. That's sort of the game in a nutshell. But on to the Game Boy version, this is really, really solid. And I'd go too far to say, and G might disagree with me on this, but it's, I think, one of the best home ports of Robocop out there. And I'd probably go even further and say I actually prefer it to the arcade original, and that's coming from somebody who last weekend, or certainly the weekend before, I was actually in an arcade club and completed Robocop in the arcade. So and I genuinely had more fun with this version. And what's your take of this, G? What's your opinion of this game?
I've only played or dabbled with the arcade version. It's not generally my kind of type of game, but it is kind of a walk and gun game as opposed to a run and gun. I did start this a few times and didn't get it, if I was honest. Didn't feel it, but I sat down with it and thought I need to play it for the show. But taking it slow and just putting some time into it, I did really enjoy it. It wasn't, I think I was making it harder than it needed to be, if I was honest, but just trying to rush through it.
Yeah, no, you very much with this game, and it's the same on the Spectrum and less so in the arcade. It's all about, again, the patterns and understanding that the enemies can either shoot down or 45-degree angle diagonal. Once you understand that, you can, and there's always patterns to how they're shooting. So you're right. As long as you're patient, you can get much further. If you go in sort of like guns blazing, you won't last very long at all.
No, and I really like the interface. It's very clear. So you've got at the bottom your shots left, your power, because you only get one life, and you've got a power meter. Yeah. And as you play through the game, you'll get like potions to increase your health bar again, your score, the level, and then the time limit with the levels. But as soon as I got my head around how to kind of play it, I did really enjoy it. It reminded me of some of the better arcade run and gun games, but I really liked it. I like to say that at the end of the level, whether it's motorbikes to start with, the little mini games really good, whether it's shooting like that hostage, but I even think the little touches, if you miss, like obviously miss the hostage, but miss like the hostage taker and hit a window, that sort of shatters. So there's lots of little details in the game, and the levels as you go through, I think you've got the first couple of levels of the streets levels, you've got unlimited ammo on your main weapon, and there's other weapons that you can get, like a three-way shot and like a more powerful shot. So it's very good. The graphics are some of the best I've seen on a game. Really very big main sprite of it, and as you said about the music, it's got its own from Jonathan Dunn. There's just websites just about this game's music, isn't there, and memes on it.
Well, I mean, the opening tune is so famous on the Spectrum, but again by Jonathan Dunn, because it's just this haunting, wonderful, like melody, like original composition, not based on the film. Just beautiful. It was so impressive on the Spectrum. But of course, what they've done is the Game Boy, original Game Boy, is very similar architecture to the Spectrum. So really, with the whole thing, whether it's the music or the graphics or the game, you've basically got a very talented team that did probably one of the best home ports on the arcade game, given suddenly more powerful hardware with the Game Boy, and they've used it to the full effect. So, like going back to the music of Jonathan Dunn, it's the same tune as the Spectrum version, but the Game Boy's got a much better sound chip than even the AY. So he's gone to the next level and really done a rich version of the tune. And as you mentioned with the graphics, same with Dawn Drake, she's made real effort with the higher resolution that you have on the Game Boy. So, in terms of detail, so you get these wonderful, say Robocop's beautifully drawn, all the backdrops are beautifully detailed. The Ed 209 sections, the robot looks so meaty and good, and as you say, all running at a fantastically smooth rate, because let's be honest, Michael Lamb and the Gerald Weatherup, who also worked on the game, they worked on this together, just brought it onto the Game Boy with all the tricks and whistles and did an amazing job. It really is. It's nice to sort of see a well-loved home port given a sort of a new home on a new platform with even more bells and whistles.
Absolutely. Even like the little touches when Ed 209 comes onto the screen shakes with a brakes under his weight as he comes through.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is another one that might have passed a lot of Game Boy owners by, because we were all, these games would cost 30 quid a pop, and I expect for a lot of people they were very wary. I know I was in a lot of cases with buying movie licenses, because you just knew invariably how bad they would be. And I remember how disappointed I was with Robocop on the Amiga. It's not for me. It wasn't a particularly good version. I suppose, given that I was so used to the Spectrum version, it was quite disappointing. I think it was only I'd stumbled across this on recommendations of others that I came to really sort of like know and love this particular port. It has genuinely become one of my favourites.
Oh, you can see why. It is a very polished game, and as you get further in the game, like with, I suppose all the games really, you get more nuances, like the elevators which come into it, and the sentry. I think level 7 when you're escaping from the OCP, you've got the laser barriers, the sentry gun turrets, and the elevators to go up and down in, and that adds a different kind of level to how you need to get through the stage.
Yeah, no, exactly. As I say, each level, and that's kind of why I actually prefer, and it's been a while since I played the Spectrum version, so I can't remember how close this runs to the Spectrum version, but certainly to the one of the things I don't like with the arcade version, the opening levels are really good, and then it gets, in my opinion, quite weak as the levels go on. It's almost like Data East got a little bit bored with the ideas. Once you pass the first few levels, it becomes I don't like the complex levels, whether they seem much better design, maybe because they're a little bit sort of more contained and smaller play areas, but it just seems to play a lot better in the later levels, in my opinion. So yeah, I had a blast. This was another one that I sort of saw all the way through to the end, and because the nice thing with these original Game Boy games, because obviously on the cartridges space was so short, a lot of these games, yes, it will take you a lot of attempts and efforts, but you can sort of make your way through sort of end to end and within half an hour in one run if you were able to. I certainly spent perhaps a lot of effort and a couple of hours to sort of make my way through, and yeah, just love this game. Brilliant.
Yeah, it was a good pick.
Yeah, so that was our top 5 that we love, but we would love to hear from you, our dear listeners. Come on the Discord chat and tell us what ones that you think that we've missed out. Perhaps you think there's another hidden gem that we're not aware of, that is a movie or TV tie-in that was on the original Game Boy. Let's keep it on the original Game Boy, because I know there's some brilliant ones on the Game Boy Color, but that's a battle for another another show and day. But is there any honourable mentions that you want to give, G?
I think when you look at the tie-ins for movies, Addams Family.
Yeah, that's quite good on the Game Boy, isn't it? It's quite good. It's good on every platform, really.
It is. I think the SNES version is my favourite, but
yes.
Dick Tracy, which I never really spent too much time with.
Is that on the Game Boy? I've never played that one on the Game Boy.
I believe there is a Game Boy one of it.
I love it on the Mega Drive. It's brilliant on the Mega Drive.
And then the Turtles game.
Yeah, is there one on the Game Boy as well? God, I need to try that one. Again, do you mean was it like side scrolling?
Yeah, I believe it was.
Oh, really good. Yeah, I mean the ones that I'm gonna have to go through all these sort of Game Boys, because as I've discovered, there's a real wonderful library of classic original Game Boy games because that's one thing I'd say is as a platform, it's very seldom you get well, there are terrible games there, obviously, but surprisingly, more often than not, the games are really, really solid. And it might be just because the nostalgia kicks in as soon as I hear like that Game Boy sound chip and I see the visuals of the Game Boy. I've sort of fallen in love with it before I've begun. But I've always been surprised, how quite a few of these games are really quite solid. The one that I had quite a lot of fun with, which surprised me actually because I didn't like it that much on the Amiga, it's the Blues Brothers. Certainly the first one that's done by Titus, and I quite liked it on the Game Boy. It's got great renditions of the Blues Brothers soundtrack, and it's just like a little side scroller, very much like on the Amiga. If you pick out the boxes, you throw the boxes at the police, and you sort of make your way through the levels, collecting records. Very sort of cookie cut platformer, and I just had quite a bit of fun with that. But I'd probably put it in a maybe 7 out of 10 for that one. I think it was on the verge of being a little bit average. Have you tried that one at all?
I haven't.
No. I particularly liked the music. I think that's the thing that I really sort of fell in love with. But like on the Amiga, it's one. Did you ever play it on the Amiga?
No.
Really well loved, certainly back in the day. Got amazing reviews, Blues Brothers. It was a platformer I personally never gelled with on the Amiga, but was always sort of a bit curious why it got such amazing reviews across the board. But I kind of get, and people do seem to have genuine fondness and love for the game, and this is a great home port of that. So if you know the Amiga version, this is just like a portable version with similar sort of like renditions. Some of the Jurassic Park ones were a little bit of fun. Again, a little bit, it was like one was like overhead and running around and collecting eggs. But again, wasn't really anything sort of special, as it were. So I do personally think we chose the best 5 film or movie, TV tie-ins on the original Game Boy. But as always, we would love to hear different from our listeners and discover new gems, because that's part of why we do all of this, is to always discover. There's always so many great hidden gems out there to try, isn't it, G?
Absolutely. I think when you look at the Game Boy, it had such a vast library of games. I think it's one of those ones that sold such a great deal of consoles, had a long lifespan. There's lots of games, especially for me. We've got quite a good library of Game Boy games. Yeah. But when you go back, some of the ones you've mentioned here are ones that just passed me by. But yeah, solid games.
Absolutely. Well, is any sort of like final shout outs or anything you want to say to our listeners, or final thoughts, G?
No, just so thanks for listening. Thanks to you and Kingy for the great shows. We've got a lot of shows coming up in the pipeline. I'm going to be on a few more of them, which is really good.
Yeah, it'd be great to have you sort of like back on some of them. I don't know, listeners, or going out having all of these sort of like time in Japan and living the good life. I don't know. Shouldn't be allowed.
It's a tough old life. Yeah, I think we've got some caravan shooter games going to be recorded soon. Me and Kingy have got the A to Z of Smups, which I've changed a couple. I know Kingy's changed a couple, but I think we keep playing too many of them as opposed to recording. And like we spoke about earlier before we started the show, we've got the best games of 1987 that we're going to bring to the front burner and start to put some gaming into that.
Yeah, it's been too long, isn't it, with those series? Because we do enjoy doing them. It's just trying to find the time for everybody, isn't it, to pin them down and work our way through. No, but as you say, it's a good lineup of shows. We're always coming up with new ideas. We're always willing to hear ideas from our listeners, and we always take on board whenever you guys or girls give us suggestions. And please, come out onto Discord. We'd love to hear from you, and it's a great way. I particularly love that it's allowing us to interact more with our listeners, which is something you just can't do in Twitter, because I don't know if what everybody else's Twitter and Facebook is like, but I find like as soon as someone's said something, within like, I don't know, even like 5 minutes later, I can't even find that original thing that was mentioned. Unless I'm specifically called out. Things are moving too quick. There's too many people sort of like tweeting or doing Facebook posts for me to like catch it all. So I really like with Discord where it's a bit more manageable, where you can have proper conversations like you used to on IRC, and have real sort of discussions and chats. So yeah, very much so. I've also tried to put little videos of a lot of the games that we've talked about, so you'll sort of see how it's always embarrassing actually, because when I swear, G, when I play the games, I'm actually a lot better, but as soon as I press the record button, I go to pot.
Happens to us all. You put some good gameplay there. You've had some good gameplay. But I think it's really good to see, and I do like the way our small Discord community is growing. There's lots of help and support. We haven't had anything toxic in there, so yeah, really enjoying being part of it.
Yeah, it's just a nice, I've been trying to work out to get a new arcade stick, and everybody's been really helpful with all their suggestions. And yeah, it's great. It's great. So please, come and join in the fun. Certainly, I'm hoping as the community begins to grow, we're sort of playing some of these games, and encourage the listeners to sort of give other suggestions or try these games themselves and give direct feedback and views of how you found the games. Because yeah, it's wonderful for us to find out, and particularly if you feel we've missed out on any games, please tell us, because I'm same as for G, and I know with Kingy and the rest of the guys, we love finding out hidden gems that we perhaps aren't aware of.
Absolutely. And again, the future episode channel, yeah, feel free to put any suggestions in there of shows you'd want us to have a look at.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, okay, so we're going to round it off. And I think because the music is so wonderful, I'm going to do like a music medley of all the games that we covered. So they're just, the show will carry on with just a music medley for you to enjoy these fantastic tunes. Okay then, guys and girls, have a wonderful time. Hope you enjoyed your Easter, and speak to you soon.